Welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a pop culture podcast. I'm Alastair Ball.
And I'm Nick Byrne.
And this week we'll be talking about DC's superhero blockbuster Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. We'll be talking about Marvel and Netflix Season 2 of Daredevil and Israeli film Waltz With Bashir. But first, Nick, what have you been watching this week?
Well, I pretty much stuck on the superhero theme, to be honest. I watched Man of Steel, the previous film in this sort of series/franchise, because I hadn't actually seen it before.
All right.
And I didn't like it that much. I mean, people have warned me, obviously, it's been years. I've had the root problems people have with the ending spoiled for me again and again at length.
Yeah.
So I knew there was going to be a ridiculous amount of death and destruction, and the bit at the end where he kills the villain was controversial. But yeah, I was surprised to see that I didn't really like the start either. It just didn't seem to really have a plot, and it just sort of...
It was quite a ponderous film, I think.
But this sort of fascination with treating Superman as the alien enigma meant that he didn't really seem like the main character. Lois was sort of generically plucky rather than being the main character, and there was just generally no main character. And yeah.
No, exactly, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we're not actually meant to be reviewing this film, so I'll shut up. But yeah, it didn't set me on great expectations for the second one.
No, it's not a great foundation for a blockbuster, Man of Steel.
So yeah, I've been superheroes, and superheroes. What have you been doing?
This week I've been watching the new series of Stuart Lee's comedy vehicle. It's pretty funny. He's consistently funny, Stuart Lee.
Yeah, it's not as perhaps quite as consistently brilliant as the last series was for me, but the most recent one, as of recording, was Death, and that was brilliant, I thought. That was actually possibly my favourite of this series.
Yeah, he hasn't done one that's as good as the UKIP one in the last series. That was very funny.
I'm a big fan of his lobster routine and his shill bottle routine, but yeah, he hasn't topped either of those, but the Death one was, I thought, probably...
Yeah, the shill bottle in the last series was also brilliant. But Chris Morris is great. He's really funny, and I'm glad he's getting more work, and also I'm glad that he's, just talking to Stuart Lee in that deadpan way that Chris Morris does is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it is just the same joke every time, but, it's Stuart Lee, so that's kind of the point, I think.
yeah, that's funny.
But yep, so yeah, before we launch into the endless superheroes, we thought, now that we're 4 episodes in, we should probably actually verbalise our policy on spoilers, which is... we're broadly in favour of them, I think. Yeah, since we're sort of a geek analysis podcast, and since we only come out every fortnight, so we're often not that bang-on timely, we will probably talk about plot points if we have anything to say about them. Especially in this case, since we're reviewing both Batman and Superman and Daredevil 2 or 1 week after they come out. I think we're probably going to assume that if you want to see it and are really, really concerned about spoilers, you've probably seen it. So yeah, in general, we will flag it up if we're going to just do a bit that flatly states, like, the big ending plot point. But in general, we're probably going to talk about content. So, yeah, if you're really hardline about spoilers, then maybe don't listen to our reviews before seeing something, is perhaps what I'm saying.
So first up, we'll be discussing Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. This, as well as being a film in its own right, this is the beginning of sort of DC's shared universe. Marvel have been incredibly successful with their shared universe and their crossover films, such as Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron. So obviously DC want to do the same thing. So Batman vs Superman, as well as being a kind of a film about Batman, film about Superman, a film about Wonder Woman, it's also a film to introduce this kind of wider DC shared universe and a lot of other characters. The question is, did it really work as a film, and did it work as a way of sort of setting up a whole franchise of future DC films? So Nick, what were your thoughts on Batman v Superman?
Well, as a comic fan, there were bits of it I quite liked. I thought the experience as a whole was a bit long and ponderous, but yeah, there was a period in the middle, I'd say about an hour or so, when it definitely had me. At least I was following it, I was moderately entertained, I wasn't too thrown out of it, except for a few exceptions that I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, I didn't entirely dislike it, and I think it is probably a better film than Man of Steel, or at least a more entertaining experience than Man of Steel, which did really get drudged down massively. But yeah, it did in the end sort of succumb to a similar problem of about half an hour, 45 minutes at the end, where it's just shapes bashing into each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't mind it for a lot of the running time, but it did lose me quite badly at the end. And even though I didn't mind watching it, I would probably still struggle to describe it as good.
Yeah, the ending is certainly the biggest problem it has. It has many problems, this film, but I think the ending was quite poorly executed. When I was watching it, I did see there's a bit when the big villain that they fight at the end kind of rises up, and obviously setting up what's going to be the climactic fight of the film. And I just thought to myself, yourself, oh great, another huge action scene full of empty spectacle and city destruction. Because that went really, really well in Man of Steel.
Yeah, it's not that they haven't learnt their lessons, though. I mean, partly because they sort of front-loaded the whole it's about collateral damage thing by making that the original basis for Batman being concerned about Superman.
Yeah.
And then, also, quite somewhat notably, every time the big fight sequence went to a new location, they cut to those military people in the Situation Room or whatever saying, oh, they've gone to the docks. It's a good job everyone's gone home.
Yeah.
Oh, they've gone to the slums. It's a good job they're uninhabited. Yeah, that is fortunate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very defensive, poor little action film.
Yeah, I guess they didn't want to get trashed in the same way as before. But the thing is, this time there was a big problem in that I didn't really care at the end. I mean, at least in Man of Steel, you'd set up Superman and, in General Zod throughout the entire film. And they'd been a sort of, an antagonism between them, which culminated in a big fight at the end. Whereas this time they throw in the villain about 30 seconds before the fight starts. I thought, I don't care about this at all.
I don't think I'm meant to care about the character of Doomsday, because he doesn't have one. Doomsday is sort of an iteration of the one slight problem with Lex Luthor as a Superman villain, in all his forms, in that he is obviously a dude in a suit, and you can't have a climactic end-of-film scene where Superman fights a dude in a suit. So there needs to be a stooge or a proxy to actually do the punching. That is something they're kind of stuck with, unless they go for to be fair, some of the comics have done, and I always think they should have done, which is have Lex Luthor either experiment on himself or get into a big suit of powered armour, so he can fight Superman himself.
Yeah, that would have probably been better. I mean, what I like about Lex Luthor as a character is the fact that Superman is so strong and Lex Luthor is physically weak, which means he has to use his intelligence to outwit Superman, either using kryptonite or threatening something he cares about. And I think the Gene Hackman, Christopher Reeves Superman nailed that really well. They managed to get that dynamic that Lex Luthor has to outsmart Superman. Whereas in this, they just had Lex Luthor create something that's big and tough for Superman to punch, along with Batman and Wonder Woman.
The problem with Doomsday, as well as, well, one of the problems with Doomsday, is that it wasn't really relevant to the plot, was it? I mean, the plot all along was about this elaborate scheme by Lex Luthor to make Batman and Superman fight.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure why he wanted to do that.
Did he want Superman to kill Batman, or did he want Superman to bring him the head of Batman? Who knows?
I don't know, because it mainly seemed to be about him getting Superman to kill Batman, but also kind of winding up Batman to kill Superman.
I guess he, like all good nerds, he knows that Batman always wins every fight. So maybe his hope was that if he sent Superman off to fight Batman to the death, then Batman would kill him.
Yeah, I guess that's the idea. But I don't know, it didn't. But I don't know why Lex Luthor wanted to kill Superman, other than the fact that he's a villain.
That is kind of one of the more structural major problems with it. Yeah, Lex Luthor. I mean, I didn't mind Jesse Eisenberg's performance except for a few bits where he really went hard on the vocal tics, and I just wanted to punch him.
Yeah.
But at least it was a bit sort of showy and having fun, unlike a lot of the other people who just scowled a lot.
Yeah.
But there was no motivation, was there? There was some sort of COD philosophy, and there was one vague mention of an abusive father that made him hate God, so now he hates Superman because Superman is God. Was that it?
Something like that, but it made no sense. I mean, a lot of the film was filled with long sections that made no sense. There's like a weird dream sequence when Batman's in like a desert wearing camo gear and there are people with wings flying around. That is completely nonsensical.
I'm pretty sure that's foreshadowing a future film, but who can tell?
I know, but when I was listening, I was just sitting there thinking, what is going on? I mean, this film, it's all over the place. Kevin Costner turns up standing on top of a mountain.
I'm pretty sure that was another dream sequence. But yeah, the use of all the dream sequences, I don't know, did they have to fill space?
Well, they certainly didn't have to fill space. It's 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, the dream sequences didn't really do anything other than slow down the plot and annoy me.
Yeah.
For the most part. Some of them are impressively shot. I mean, it's not all an ugly film. I mean, Zack Snyder can put together a shot. That's always the token nice thing people say about him before they start slagging him off, and, it's not untrue.
Yeah, it is. It's quite nice to look at. It's got a kind of moody colour scheme.
I mean, the shots of individual stuff happening, all the slow motion pictures of things, they're sort of quite nice to look at until you start to realise that they're slowing the momentum of the story down to a crawl. And it did. Even the visual attractiveness, which is, I think, half the appeal, did sort of just break down a bit by the end. That massive fight with Doomsday, that was not an attractive sequence.
Yeah.
I sort of came into it at the beginning. The collateral damage stuff, that's actually interesting in a way, because that is a reaction to the first film.
Yeah.
That is him actually responding in world to the criticism that there was too much damage and using it as the basis for the conflict. That's not uninteresting. It's just that it doesn't really go anywhere. I don't really remember a specific bit where Batman and Superman actually have a conversation about the collateral damage. I mean, does anyone have a conversation with him about it?
No, exactly. And, even when Batman and Superman are fighting, he doesn't bring up the fact that, that Batman's fighting Superman because of all the, destruction he caused and all the people he killed. They're just fighting for some bizarrely cryptic, in-film storyline that made basically no sense.
If it had ended with, them fighting and Superman just breaking down and saying, look, I'm sorry, I was young, I'm new at this, I'm trying my best, but I'm sorry, then, I suspect that's not the ending the fanboys are after, but it would have at least resolved something about it.
It would have, resolved that plot line.
And it would have resolved their conflict, and, I know Batman's a bit of a dick, but he might conceivably have let him live. Yeah,
that would have been better than what we did end up with. It's full of all these, kind of bits which going on about democracy. There's Holly Hunter's a senator who's sort of has, again, a fairly nonsensical storyline, and she kind of rambles about democracy and things, and there's kind of all these bizarre dream sequences and sort of...
I thought that was meant to be the storyline, but, aggressively addressed the whole collateral damage thing. But they didn't really touch on it that much, and mostly went on about that desert thing.
Yeah, exactly. That was another thing that was, basically really ham-fistedly done. They have a whole bit at the beginning when they go on about, all the destruction that Superman caused at the end of Man of Steel and, how many people that must have killed inadvertently. And, getting into that is quite interesting. And then they just put in this strange bit in North Africa at the beginning involving Lois Lane at the beginning of Batman vs Superman. And then they talk about that mainly instead, which is, again, you've got a perfectly good, element of collateral damage in Superman to talk about. Why is there this need to throw more in?
I know, it's the thing. The idea that, Batman's angry with Superman about the collateral damage and Lex Luthor tries to leverage that into them fighting so that Batman can kill him. It's not an unreasonable plot for this sort of thing. Bearing in mind that, it's a superhero fight, so they have to fight over misunderstanding and then team up. If you're going to do it, then that's not the worst way to do it. But the need to keep nailing more shit on just gets a bit overpowering.
Yeah, what I didn't like about this film was my same criticisms of Avengers Age of Ultron, is that it's got too many characters and it's got too many subplots.
Age of Ultron was better, though.
Age of Ultron was a better film.
Sorry, carry on.
But it had Age of Ultron was definitely a better film, but they both have the same flaw, which is that, too many characters, too many subplots, too many bits bolted onto the main story that, don't make sense or don't work. I'm not really sure what the point of having Lois Lane in this film is, other than the fact that it's a Superman film, but you must have Lois Lane in it. She's got a lot of screen time, but I don't really see in any way how she contributes to the plot.
Her weird bath scene at the start of the film was...
Yeah, that was strange.
I'm not always great at spotting, the inherent sexism of things. I often have to have it pointed out to me afterwards. But that, I was just thinking, why is she naked? Why isn't this taking place at a kitchen table?
Yeah, exactly.
It just sort of read like, we have to have a conversation, it's mostly exposition. How can we make it exciting? Can the lady be naked?
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. But there's too many plot lines, and there's too many characters, and there's sort of too many things going in too many different directions. It does make me wonder if superhero crossover films work at all. Maybe Captain America Civil War will prove me wrong, but it's just in a medium of cinema where you have a quite a relatively short running time compared to like a TV series or something. Trying to get that many characters in, fully developed, and that many plot lines just creates these meandering films that kind of go all over the place, have way too much stuff in them, not enough focus on what the actual story is.
I think, to be honest, Wonder Woman is okay in this film. It didn't blow me away, but it was a perfectly fine, here is the character. But at the same time, you could remove the character from the film, it would not affect the plot, nothing would be lost. With the exception of the fact that it's nice to finally see Wonder Woman in the cinema, I would not have cared.
Yeah, Wonder Woman's just in it. That's the thing. She just kind of crops up and that's it. And also, as has been pointed out, Bruce Wayne gets to be, a kind of a billionaire philanthropist and do some sort of spy techie things as well as being Batman. Clark Kent gets to be a plucky reporter as well as being Superman. And Wonder Woman's role, other than being Wonder Woman, is apparently to turn up at parties and look pretty, be vaguely alluring, and sort of say sort of strange cryptic things.
Well, as you said, there were a lot of characters in this film. I dread to think what kind of monster it would have become if they tried to add a fully developed backstory, supporting cast, and inner life for Wonder Woman as well.
Yeah.
But yes, you are right. But that's the cost of being the guest star who's only there to set up future films.
Yeah, but it's a 2.5 hour long film, and it really does drag. It is very long, and it is quite poorly paced, and it's just got so much stuff in it. I was just thinking, it needs someone to go through and say, cut this, take out all sorts of stuff. All the stuff involving the Daily Planet could quite happily be trimmed, thrown in the bin.
I don't know. I mean, maybe the difference between you, the hardened film critic, and me, the comic nerd, is beginning to show through here, but I liked that stuff. It's just because I wanted to, it's the Superman-y stuff I sort of wanted to see all through Man of Steel. I know that a lot of it was superfluous, but considering this is meant to be the sequel to the Superman film, even though they have sort of turned it into a Batman film, I did kind of want to see that.
Well, that would have worked in a Superman film. If you'd made like an hour and a half long film about Superman, you could have had Lex Luthor and you could have had the Daily Planet in there, and you could have had a reasonable role for Lois Lane. You could have done all those things in a Superman film. The problem is that this film has to also be a Batman movie and set up about 5 or 6 other spin-off films. So it's just got so much stuff going on in it. I mean, you could create a perfectly good Superman film, and you can create perfectly good Batman movies. It's just these crossover movies with too much stuff in them don't seem to work.
Yeah, I mean, there were like crossover miniseries in the comic, which, again, are of varying quality. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it just feels like there's too much shit going on at the same time. I would in terms of what you're saying about it being overstuffed and trying to do too many things, I would like to give a special shout-out to that scene where Wonder Woman just sits there watching trailers for future films, which I do think was actually when the film completely lost me. Like, it was building towards the climax. Things were starting to happen. The things they'd done were coming together.
Yeah.
I wasn't sitting there thinking, my God, this is amazing, but I was interested in with it. And then it just cuts to Wonder Woman watching short videos on her computer. I'm not judging her for doing that. In many ways, that was just part of the film most resembled my everyday life. But, God, it was just such a total slamming weight on the whole momentum of it. And then it just never really recovered from it, to be honest, because after that it was just endless punching.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. The need to cram in all sorts of other films, wasted so much time. I mean, The Flash turns up I'm not even sure if that bit when The Flash turns up is a dream or reality.
I think that's real. I didn't mind that, to be honest. That's the sort of thing Marvel would do. It didn't go on that long.
It's entirely inconsequential to the plot, but it just has to be in there.
Yeah, well, I try to be conscious of my own hypocrisy. I don't want to get in and take the cattle rod to this film for doing that, when if Marvel did it, I probably wouldn't care. But, yeah, that was the sort of a level of setup I could live with. The watching trailers on her computer thing was a level of awful that I honestly don't think a Marvel film would do.
I think you can get away with that sort of thing. You can get away with these nods to other future films or past films in a good film, and I wouldn't have minded it if this had been a good film. The problem is, this isn't a good film.
Yeah, when you take a few minutes out of your film for what is in many ways a glorified commercial break, you're trading, I guess, on your audience goodwill to let you do that. And if you haven't accrued any goodwill, as this film clearly hasn't with you, I can see how you might find that fucking infuriating.
Yeah, it was just more distractions and more extra things bolted on into what is already a very long film.
Yeah, I let them have the Flash one. I did not like the other one.
Yeah, well, it could have been made to work, I suppose.
Maybe. I mean, it's the sort of thing that might have worked as a post-credits scene. The film's basically over. I can enjoy it as a little DVD extra. But, yes, rammed into the film at the point where stuff is finally starting to happen with some degree of momentum just really did just trash it for me.
Yeah.
I don't even want to get into why Lex Luthor has made logos for all these superheroes for their future corporate use. But anyway.
I really don't know what that was about. And why for some reason we got him spying on Aquaman. I guess the only reason why they've got this bit of him of Lex Luthor spying on Aquaman is so they can set up a forthcoming Aquaman film.
That is correct, yes. Well, I think they're going to be in the Justice League first, but yes, that is it.
Yeah, that's the plan. But the thing is, this film, a lot of the point of this film seems to be to set up the future shared universe DC films. And I understand that, I guess, this is the way they want to go. They've got to do that at some point. And obviously they're quite keen to, all right, everyone's going to turn up to this film because everyone loves Batman. And then we can subtly, or not so subtly at some points, push them towards future films of characters maybe they don't know about or, aren't so excited about, and then get them to see those films. And, okay, that's a reasonable approach. The only problem is this film is so bad, it's put me off any of these other films. I mean, if they can make Batman fighting Superman so bad, I shudder to think how awful the Aquaman movie is going to be. It will be unwatchably terrible. So
I hate to break it to you, man, but if we're still doing this podcast, you're probably going to have to watch them anyway.
I can imagine I will go see it, but
at full price at the cinema.
I think that's that's sadly inevitable. I think my face will probably be fixed in a permanent cringe if we have to sit through a 2.5 hour Aquaman film.
Yes, you do. Again, my greater level of goodwill to this sort of thing means I am still of the attitude, well, the only future films this has aggressively put me off or, turned down my expectations for is future ones directed by Zack Snyder. Because after 2 attempts, I'm generally struggling with my belief that he can make a good one of these. But, yeah, I mean, the Gal Gadot appearance here did not put me off a Wonder Woman film. It convinced me that, yes, she can do a good Wonder Woman.
I think all the actors are good.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy Irons is out good at Alfred is sort of always the scene-stealing thing in these films,
Yeah.
He's a witty British butler. All you need to do is cast a charismatic British actor and give them a few good one-liners, and they're pretty much got everything they need to steal the film.
Yeah, but I thought Ben Affleck was really good as Batman. I thought and also as Bruce Wayne. He did quite a good performance. The opening scene in which he's kind of a spectator to the destruction at the end of Man of Steel, I thought was, he does a really great performance, shows him, how frightened he is and also how angry he is and how powerless he is. And, Ben Affleck does do a pretty good performance of someone who is sort of angry and traumatized. In fact, I was quite on board with his performance. It got to the point when I started to feel really sorry for him because he's really putting his all into a film that fortunately is really, really bad. So it's a shame. It would have been a good performance in a different film, but it's just such a bad film.
Yeah, I would, despite my not that keenness on this film, if they announced the Ben Affleck Batman film tomorrow, then as long as it isn't directed by Zack Snyder, I'm pretty much there for it, yeah.
Yeah, so...
I'm there for it anyway, for aforementioned podcast reasons, but I'd be there for it enthusiastically.
Yeah, I think a Batman film with Ben Affleck, could be good. But it's just this film. I don't know, it's just so creaking and just so sprawling. It's ridiculous. I mean, in Zack Snyder does this all the time. I don't know why people keep hiring him to do things. It's this film, Man of Steel, The Watchman, all of the same problem, which is that he thinks this is really, really important and deep, kind of emotional, philosophical cinema, whereas they're actually quite empty, quite ridiculous, and quite bad. Yeah,
the writer Chris Brosnahan, who is a friend of ours and whose work you should definitely check out, did a post on his blog where he basically said that he felt this was comics aren't just for kids anymore, the movie. Like, it's an angry teenager screaming that his comics have value. And there's certainly a pretty big element of that, I think.
The problem with this is a textbook argument for why comics aren't sort of important and worth paying attention to. I think that comics are interesting and have a lot to say about pop culture, but if you're going to make pretentious Batman movies that kind of ramble nebulously about truth, the devil, and politics, then obviously no one's going to take them seriously. I mean, a film like Ant-Man, which is, has like good story, good characters, some humour, some fun, that by making it's a good film, it's something people like and it's something people can invest themselves in emotionally. This kind of sprawling epic of pretentiousness, is the sort of thing that really puts people off taking something seriously.
To an extent, it's redundant to play it wasn't a Marvel movie card when it clearly wasn't trying to be, but they took out the sort of the tone Marvel have adopted, the sort of Joss Whedon-y action banter thing, which has clearly been working for them so far, and they didn't really replace it with much, I don't think.
No.
I get the desire to differentiate themselves on a corporate level from Marvel by saying, look, we have a different tone, and this belief that, what they want to do is play up the big, serious, mythic aspect of their heroes. But I don't know, I guess you could argue that you could get away with that because everyone knows who Batman and Superman are, but it's just something missing in just throwing straight into the big operatic look at the myths thing, because you just don't seem to have the investment to care.
The thing is, because people know these characters and see them as they're larger than life icons. Even if you've never seen a Batman film or a Superman film, you've got a pretty solid idea of who Batman and who Superman is. And they do play off that quite well in the film. Like, for example, they don't spend much time in, Dawn of Justice explaining who Batman is and explaining who Superman is. They just get on with the film, which I really liked. I mean, there's not much background to Wonder Woman either, but I do like the fact that they kind of go straight in with the characters and expect you to be familiar with them. My problem is it's a 2.5-hour film that doesn't have much background on its main characters, which just left me thinking, what did they do with all that time? Oh yeah, they just filled it up with stuff that made absolutely no sense, like bizarre dream sequences, things involving kind of the Russian mafia and some warlords in sort of North Africa. And it was all completely pointless and a complete waste of time.
Yeah, and then topping it off with 45 minutes of punching the big trolley thing. Yeah, Doomsday is basically an amazing example of sort of making the same mistake twice, in that Doomsday was created in the 90s for the death of Superman story, and did seem to be the result of a meeting where someone said, we want to kill Superman, we want him to die fighting a new villain. What should this new villain be? Should it be a big grey thing that just appears and then punches him a lot? Yes, let's go for lunch. And yeah, and you'd think the fact that was best part of 20 years ago, and they've had time to, maybe build up the concept a bit, meant they could have either made Doomsday better or not used it, but instead they have just seemingly done the same thing again. It's like, film, need, monster, great thing, punch, lunch, go.
They also seem to have learned very little from Man of Steel, or if they have, they've taken all the wrong lessons. I mean, they've written in, obviously they've written in some dialogue explaining that, okay, now they're not trashing thousands of people for no reason, but they didn't learn the lesson, which is having a kind of a big empty spectacle on the end of your film, isn't very good. And so on the end of this film, they have a big empty spectacle.
But did you think it was better than Man of Steel? I thought it was, at least, I was certainly more entertained watching this than I was Man of Steel.
I thought it was better than Man of Steel for a few reasons. The cast was better. Ben Affleck was really good as Batman. Jeremy Irons was really good as Alfred. I thought Wonder Woman was a good addition. So yeah, they added in some things that were kind of lacking in Man of Steel. So it had a bit more entertainment value. But yeah, so I would say it's better than Man of Steel, but it's not much better. And it's certainly quite a few yards short of good.
I note that Henry Cavill is missing from your list of actors you appreciate. Are you not a fan?
Not really. He seems to have one facial expression. I quite liked him in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'm told he does charming and happy.
Yeah, that's a good film, and he's great in that kind of role. He's great in a role that's fun, and it's got some humour, and it's got some life to it. I mean, he can act, and he can bring a kind of charm, charisma, a bit of swagger, and a sense of enjoyment to something that is an enjoyable film. So
that just brings us to the conclusion that in these Superman films, it's not that he can't be charming and upbeat, he's been told not to.
Yeah, that's basically it. This is a film that seems to be devoid of joy.
There were 2 jokes, I think I counted.
Yeah.
Actually, no, to be fair, there were 2 jokes that weren't said by Alfred. If you count Alfred's jokes, there were a few more.
Yeah. I mean, there were some bits that were so, horribly emotionally just ill-judged. I mean, there's a bit in the big fight sequence at the end when there's this sort of teary moment between Superman and Lois Lane, and it's just so misjudged as a moment.
Was that the bit where she knows he's about to die, even though it's not actually that clear he's about to die?
Yeah, and
okay, cool.
It's the thing is, I think it's people who've been working on these films, and they know what this scene is supposed to achieve. The only problem is the audience has no idea why it's there.
The other pivotal bit, which was meant to be a big emotional beat and only sort of half worked for me, was and I am about to spoil the crux of the Batman-Superman fight, so again, if you're chronically spoiler-averse, then I guess tune out for a few minutes, is the bit where they reveal that Batman's mum has the same name as Superman's mum, and this is what convinces him to not kill the shit out of him with a big spear. And yeah, I mean, it's a nice bit of comic trivia. It's, tugging on the parents' issues is a fair tug for both characters, though it did pivot entirely on Superman whilst delirious from Kryptonite, referring to his mum by her first name. I mean, surely, of all times, whilst delirious, you would go, Mom, rather than Martha. So yeah, even that, which was a not awful bit of trivia-based emotional beating, managed to annoy the shit out of me thanks to its plot convenient stupidity.
It was staggeringly convenient.
If he'd said Mom, it would have worked, but then of course it wouldn't have worked. It's just, again, as with bugging in Doomsday just as something to punch, it's surely you could have had a couple more meetings and and worked out a less stupid way for him to find out that bit of trivia. But yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, it does seem to be quite lazily put together. I think they haven't spent a lot of time.
There was a rumour, again, strictly a rumour, that the title and premise of this film was conceived about, I think, a matter of days, if not hours, before the Comic-Con convention where they announced it. So yeah, it possibly has been made slightly on the fly.
Yeah. Well, they've had time to fix it since then.
I guess it's like a huge boat or something. I think that's the second time I've used this metaphor in this podcast anyway. But, once it's moving, there's an extent to which you can't turn it that far.
The problem is they seem to have steered this boat headlong into an iceberg. And even when it's kind of hitting the iceberg, they're still going at full speed and just kind of grinding further into it. And it's quite a painful experience to watch.
Although, speaking of things hitting boats, I will say that chase sequence with the Batmobile where he smashes through a boat. Yeah, I liked that. That was fun. That was the sort of ridiculous, oh god, what's he doing now silliness I want for my comic film.
Yeah, exactly.
That was possibly my favourite part of the whole film.
Yeah, they had some good action sequences in there, especially when Batman fights Superman. But I don't know, it took forever to get around to the point of Batman fighting Superman. It also, I don't know, and the fight seemed to be over too quickly. I mean, the whole point of the film is Batman fighting Superman, and it was about 10 minutes out of a 2.5-hour film, which again led me to think, what do they do with the rest of the time?
I'm not going to endorse putting more fighting into this film. I mean, yes, they should probably have taken a lot or all of the time away from the Doomsday fight and given it to the Batman-Superman one, but still.
Yeah, if DC are going to be making more films, they need to really have a think about what they're going to be like, and decide and obviously look at what's wrong with this film, and then take steps so they don't make more films that are like it. I mean, I think really DC need to rethink their shared universe if this is what it's going to be like, because it's just about tolerable. It's not really enjoyable in a Batman versus Superman film. When they get to the point of making Aquaman movies, if they're anything like this, it's going to be unbearably awful.
Well, the thing is, we haven't got the wider context for this. I mean, maybe the DC appeal, maybe what they're going to try and do is go, right, we're just going to, rather than beating it down to a bit of a house style, which, although I like the Marvel films, they have kind of done, is they're actually going to go, right, we're going to get our directors and just let them do whatever the hell they want. Which means Zack Snyder gets to make his massive, portentous, violent, borderline video game film, and the Wonder Woman director's going to do something entirely different. Maybe directorial authenticity is going to be their thing. I don't know. It just so happens that it started badly here because they have hired a director we are not fans of.
No. If this is going to be their house style, they're going to make a lot of bad films. I think the only way they're going to make this work, I say, is as you say, giving the directors and writers a bit more freedom with each project.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe that's what they've done. Maybe this is a free Zack Snyder.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see in a few months when Suicide Squad comes out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to compare this to Suicide Squad. It'll also be interesting to compare this to the Wonder Woman movie next year. I'm not filled with hope.
Yeah, no, me neither.
Probably the best part of the whole, I mean, because including the adverts, trailers, and the ridiculous number of sort of idents that Odeon put on before a film, the best part, the entire sort of 3.5 hour extravaganza, was the 2-minute Lego Batman trailer at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm with that.
That was funny, and I'm really, really excited for Lego Batman coming out next year. And I couldn't quite help the sinking feeling that, like, that's the best Batman thing I'm going to see today, isn't it? And I was right.
The kids behind me in the cinema were definitely bored. I can tell because they kept talking.
Yeah, that was really annoying.
It was really annoying, and I feel like these films always bat hard for 12As because they want the kid audience. If the kids are bored, then, as we quoted Chris Brosnahan on earlier, if you're pivoting hard for the comics aren't for kids anymore audience, then maybe superheroes aren't for kids anymore, to be more accurate, then maybe you don't care. But at the same time, you want the kids in for the actual money. You can't have your kids and eat them. These big 12A films are eventually going to run into problems if kids look at them and think, boring. But then again, as we've discussed, this is arguably a quite pretentious teenager's idea of a good time, so maybe the kids love this.
Yeah, I don't know, yeah. It does strike me, it's the sort of film that a kid who sits in the corner of the sixth form common room and decided, like, my way I'm going to differentiate myself from everyone else is that I'm deep, and I'm going to, like, walk around with Dostoevsky and the London Review of Books under my arm and stuff, and kind of make pretentious Facebook status updates about the state of the world or the nature of truth or the nature of reality. And, I don't know, you've stopped being fun. You've also not really got anything interesting or to say on these topics. So you're just kind of, wandering around just quoting Nietzsche and stuff. They found that teenager, given them $250 million and pretty much unlimited creative license to create a superhero product placement film. And it's not very good, as you'd expect.
Well, I'm done.
I think I'm done. Let's say some nice things about Daredevil.
Okay, and now for something completely different. It's a superhero product aimed at adults, in which a light vigilante is confronted with a darker one. Yes, it's Daredevil Season 2 from Netflix, in which Daredevil continues his crusade against Hell's Kitchen crime, and comes up against the Punisher, basically. It's the Punisher, and an angry man in black with guns who, instead of bonking the bad guys over the head and tying them up for the police, tends to just, shoot them. So yeah, we've watched the first 4 episodes of this, which I'm aware is pathetic compared to some of you out there who watched the whole thing in one day. Sorry. But yeah, we watched the first 4 episodes, which do form a sort of discrete unit of a story arc. I quite liked it. Alastair, did you like it?
Yeah, I did like it. In fact, I think the season 2 is better than season 1. As it goes with these things, you've got to take the first season to introduce the situation and the characters. In season 2, everyone's familiar with the situation and characters, so we can really get into the meat of some interesting stories. The Punisher, I thought, was a really good character. There's lots of interesting things to say about the Punisher. But yeah, I'm liking this. I like the fact that, because, Daredevil is interesting. He's a lawyer, but he's also a vigilante, I guess. He takes the law into his own hands. Punisher just takes the idea one step further.
Yeah. I mean, the 3rd episode, I think, where they're having a lengthy rooftop chat about the
that was good
between them, and that was good. I mean, he's not making amazingly unique philosophical points, but he is really acting them well. And yeah, the bit where he talks to that old veteran while Daredevil's chained up just away is...
Yeah, it was tense.
I'm assuming the Punisher would never actually have shot him, because that would go against his whole point, but, he still managed to convince us he might, and that was... Yeah, John Bernthal is really good at that. I mean, he played a very Punisher-y role in The Walking Dead, or at least he was, the unhinged one on the edge who kept doing extreme stuff. So I was pretty happy, or at least pretty optimistic, when he was cast as the Punisher, and yeah, he's great. He's not exactly sympathetic, but he makes the character seem understandable. I mean, without compromising the fact that he's, scary as fuck. Yeah, the bit in the hospital in episode 1, which, as another review pointed out, I mean, the way it's just one lone dude walking into a public place and opening fire, yeah, I mean, that's flat-out mass shooter language. Yeah. That's making it clear that this is someone who, if you would not ever want to meet, and who is not cool. Yeah, because, I mean, they introduce him with that with this sort of off-screen massacre where he, kills about 8 gangsters without actually entering the room.
Yeah.
So and then you sort of think, oh, are they doing sort of the Punishers is so cool and efficient and Batman-esque, and then you get that sequence at the end of that episode where he is just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I mean it's believable. Obviously, mass shootings are things that there is a problem with in America, and the Punisher is something that you believe could happen. I mean, I've heard people make arguments similar to the Punisher's argument. It's an argument I've heard made in pop culture before, which is that the law is insufficient. The law doesn't protect the right people. The law doesn't establish right and wrong. It's not working properly, and we need to take the law into our own hands. I've heard people say this in the real world. I've heard people say it in books and in TV shows, and so that it's believable that something like the Punisher could come into existence in our world. I mean, a man who is in the army, was in the army, has a lot of skills and with weapons and stuff, and hunting people, taking the law into his own hands, deciding that he doesn't need any oversight or directive. He just, he can establish right from wrong and sort of be judge, jury, and executioner in one person. And it's an interesting character. I mean, it's not exactly a new character. I mean, the Punisher, I think, is quite similar to Dexter in that he's, a guy who takes the law into his own hands, decides who can live, who can die.
Well, yeah, I mean, to make the obvious point, the Punisher obviously predates Dexter by several decades, but yeah.
Yeah,
in the comics.
They're not the only example of these characters, like I say, who take the law into their own hands, because it's something that I think a lot of people do worry about, which is that justice isn't perfect. The police don't always catch the people responsible for crimes, or if they do, there's problems bringing them to justice, or people feel that the punishments that are given out for committing crimes and for hurting people aren't severe enough. And, there is certainly there's a sense in all of us and within our kind of, within our collective psyche that is expressed through popular culture of this idea, well, what if we just sort it out ourselves? I mean, I'm a reasonable person. I can tell good from evil. I could, sort out the streets just by killing the people who commit the crimes, and that would send out a powerful signal for people to be good. I mean, it's something you hear about, and it's something people talk about, which is why this idea keeps coming up, and you see it in different forms in popular culture. You see it in Dexter, you see it in the character of the Punisher.
I don't generally watch TV and think, oh my god, what if the kids replicated that? Because I don't know, I just don't. But there have been people doing unpleasant serial killer shit and citing Dexter as a partial inspiration. And partly did sort of sit back after I watched the last 3 episodes of the Punisher arc in one continuous, quite grim marathon, which I did, and then think, well, I mean, obviously I'm not now going to learn to shoot a gun and become a crazed urban vigilante, but part of me always wonders if there are people out there of the mindset to watch this go, wow, he's a dude, I should totally do that.
Yeah.
But obviously there's nothing I can do about that, and I don't think the showrunners are glamorising him or presenting him as someone to be replicated.
No,
but,
they're not.
As you say, the Punisher is a very archetypal, straightforward representation of an idea. I think he has a certain universalisable appeal. It's not a complicated or convoluted backstory, it's just he is a man in black with guns. And yeah, which is possibly why it's so scary and why it's so relatable and obvious.
Yeah, I think obviously not many people would behave like the Punisher, but I do think a lot of people would be sympathetic to someone like that in reality. I mean, Daredevil, the show, doesn't present the Punisher as someone who's a good guy or someone that we should seek to emulate. And the show Dexter, I think, also didn't, there was supposed to always be a lot of questions over Dexter, complicated moral issues. Is he doing the right thing? But I know people who watched the show and they were like, yeah, I just love it that, Dexter, dispatches justice. It's nice to see, criminals get their comeuppance. And I think people say that kind of missing the point of Dexter, but that doesn't mean they're not sympathetic to what he wanted to do, and I think people would also be sympathetic to the Punisher.
Well, yeah, I mean, to drift off into reviewing something entirely different, I think the problem with some of the latter shitter series of Dexter is that the writers of Dexter forgot the point of Dexter, but anyway.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the problems with Dexter.
When he became a sort of borderline superhero whose actions weren't really morally questioned, or at least not very much. But anyway, back to Daredevil.
Yeah.
I mean, possibly one of the reasons I like him so much, or that I like this show so much, I guess, is that it is one of the best representations of the sort of urban street vigilante that I've seen on TV. And I've, as someone who came up on Spider-Man comics, I've always wanted a sort of proper ongoing street vigilante series, and this is the closest we've got. I mean, Arrow gets close, but tends to drift off a bit into utterly stupid shit, whereas this so far has been very much the sort of thing I like.
Yeah, exactly. In some ways, the morality of Daredevil isn't that complicated. The bad guys are all bad, which does make you wonder, in a universe where bad people are all bad, what's wrong with the Punisher dispensing justice? I mean, there's various gangs in the TV show. We see a bit of some of their characters. The Punisher kind of goes around shooting them, and we never get a sense really that these guys the Punisher's killing have there's any doubts that they're bad people, that they have a good side to them.
Well, I imagine, getting to the point of speculating about future episodes that other people have seen, which is pointless, but I imagine eventually, probably before the end of this season, we'll get a conflict wherein the Punisher wants to kill someone who Daredevil or someone who we firmly believe should not be killed. I mean, we did spend a lot of time last year with the Kingpin by breaking their backs, trying to give him, an inner life and things that he believes in, and his romance with Vanessa, and trying not to make him a simplistic villain. But I still think it's probably good that they've gone for the Punisher and this slightly different conflicts rather than just bringing in Crime Lord number 2.
Yeah, but it's different. It is nice to see something different.
Yeah, but you didn't like the Kingpin as much as I did you? You weren't in love with him as a villain.
I wasn't blown away by the Kingpin. He was okay as a villain. I just felt there was lacked something interesting. There was nothing that really made me go, oh, well, this is an interesting character. I can see what they've done here. For example, I really liked Jessica Jones. And I really liked David Tennant playing Kilgrave in that. And I thought he was really good because they really created a quite interesting character with Kilgrave. He's someone, obviously, who's got a lot of privilege, a lot of entitlement, but also someone who's been abused, someone who treats people poorly, some people doesn't see what's wrong with how he behaves. You can see people who act like Kilgrave or people who are similar to him in real life. And you can see people who are sort of vaguely at least sympathetic with the outlook of the Punisher. The Kingpin, I don't know.
The whole Vanessa plotline was clearly, an attempt to make him sympathetic.
And I like the fact they did that they gave him. He's more than just a villain. He's got a family. He's got a backstory. He wants love and a normal life to some degree. But I'm not sure really what they were doing that gave the Kingpin a real sense of depth. Not the fact he's just a kind of.
I like the performance. I thought, Vincent D'Onofrio really, really gave it some soul. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he was a good actor. I mean, it wasn't bad. It's just I'm not sure what was the thing that was great about the Kingpin. And there is something I think that's really good about the Punisher and something that's really good about Kilgrave.
I think, the problem with the Kingpin maybe was that although I liked him as a character, what does he want? What is he trying to achieve? What's his villainous motivation? Why is he a villain? Was sometimes a bit nebulous. It's like something to do with gentrification and selling stuff. But to me, it's weird that they're not that concrete, considering that Daredevil Season 1 was 13 episodes, and with, a couple of exceptions, basically all of them are about that storyline, almost exclusively. So it's a bit weird that we never really got that good an idea of what he was trying to achieve.
Yeah, I know. They could have got it. They said they could have gone into it in more detail.
One thing I do like about this season of Daredevil, potentially, compared to both Jessica Jones and Daredevil Season 1, is that they seem to be doing something a bit more modular with the storytelling. Like, they're doing 4 episodes on the Punisher and then they're moving on to something else.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I say this, I haven't seen the rest of it, but it did feel a bit like first seasons of Daredevil and Jessica Jones could have done with other things going on. I did occasionally feel this is a bit stretched, isn't it? Over 13 episodes? Did it need to be this long? Some of these are a bit slow.
Yeah.
I thought Jessica Jones executed it a bit better than Daredevil, but both of them, to be honest, could have benefited with either less episodes or more story.
Yeah, there's an episode in the first series of Daredevil which is kind of, I think, sums this up quite well, which is that it's one, I think, in the first series, Daredevil's trying to bring down the Kingpin, a sort of big gangster, I guess, and the Kingpin's involved with several gangs in New York. One of them is a Russian gang, and there's one episode where I think Daredevil he's kidnapped their boss of one of the Russian gangs and is trying to basically get information out of him, information of him about the Kingpin that will help him move forward to taking him down. And the episode is basically, the whole episode is him just trying to get information from this Russian guy, and it is kind of pointless. You could resolve it in one scene. You know that at the end of the episode, the guy's going to give up the information and the plot's going to move on. I don't know why we needed a whole episode of just Daredevil arguing with a Russian bloke.
Yeah, but then again, we just had a whole episode of basically Daredevil talking his vigilante philosophy with the Punisher, and we duly praised it. Yeah, another thing in that episode I wanted to comment on, actually, is at the end, the big hallway fight scene that goes on for about 5-10 minutes. The one that he just moves down that building bashing people.
It's all one long shot.
At the end of episode 3, it does seem to be a sort of homage callback to the similar one-shot fight scene in Daredevil Season 1. I'm not convinced the one in Season 2 actually is one shot, because there's quite a few bits where the screen is covered black for a second and they could easily have cut, but
yeah,
nonetheless, it is, I think, meant to be a sort of a homage or a little callback or this is what we do statements or something. I didn't like it as much. I preferred the one in the first season. I felt the one in the first season really seemed to communicate the fatigue and the battering that Daredevil's taking, whereas the one in Season 2, as you just said, it was a bit, he's going down a staircase. I mean, if it actually affects him in some way, if he ends up being overcome, or if the Punisher ambushed him while he was weak, then fair enough. But he was literally just, he fought his way down this building and then left the building. I just a bit sort of, that's too long for something where the whole point seems to basically be a sort of show reel / homage. If you want to do a little jokey homage to yourself, then do a one-liner. Don't do that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I know, I remember watching that. First I was thinking, oh, this is quite spectacular. And at the end I was like, this is just a guy hitting a lot of generic villain types. If your villains aren't developed enough, or at least even your henchmen villains, if they aren't developed enough or interesting enough, and if your fight scenes are too long and too overdone, you basically become the Power Rangers. You've got a guy who's good at martial arts punching the putties. And I basically was thinking, like, this is just it's just the Power Rangers. It's just people punching each other. There's no depth or insight to here. It's just people punching each other. And after a while, I'm like, it's kind of stopped really having any effect on me at all.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I honestly, I was quite surprised and disappointed when it didn't end in someone taking advantage of his fatigue. But then again, they couldn't really have ended the third episode with Daredevil gets jumped by the Punisher, because that's how they ended the first and second one. So
yeah.
To be honest, that's my main substantive criticism of the first 3 episodes. The pace is still a tad free and easy, but I think it's felt a bit tighter than the first series, and I like the fact they resolved a storyline in 4 episodes rather than doing 13. I'm sure the Punisher will be back, but I liked the fact that it felt like a single unit.
I hope the Punisher is...
I'll be amazed if he isn't back in some form, at least for the last 2 or 3 episodes or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they got a bit better at giving Foggy and Karen stuff to do.
There can be a problem sometimes with the superhero things, that you are mainly interested in the superheroes being superheroes, and you've got to make the life outside the superhero guys relevant to the story. I mean, going back to Batman vs Superman, I think one of the problems with Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman is you don't really get a sense of how, Clark Kent's life with Lois Lane relates in any way to the main story, or even why it's there. What I do like about Daredevil is that they're both the story of Matt Murdock and the story of Daredevil are related to this notion of justice and relating to doing what's right. And they're usually both, Daredevil is attacking the same problem through 2 avenues, a superhero avenue and the legal avenue. I liked Series 1, how it ended with, in the last episode, Nelson and Murdoch get the FBI involved and gather evidence to get the Kingpin and his associates arrested and sent to prison, and then it ends with the physical fight between the Kingpin and Daredevil. The fact that they brought both storylines together in the final episode made his life as a lawyer relate to his life as a superhero. That works well.
I mean, to bring Dexter in again in a completely unrelated point, I think whenever it cut to a character who wasn't Dexter or Deborah or the guest star serial killer of the year in Dexter, there was always a little, it's time for the plebs, is it? It's time for the nothings. It's time for the boring bit. And there was a bit of that in Daredevil Season 1 with the Foggy and Karen stuff, but I think they do seem to have got a bit better at making it feel like those bits matter this year, which I appreciate.
The other thing is they're developing the emotional sides of the story quite well, or the interpersonal conflict, in that now we've got a strange thing, which is that Matt Murdock seems to be interested in Karen in a romantic way, when it looked like in the first series they were manoeuvring Foggy and Karen together as a romantic storyline, whereas in this series they seem to be manoeuvring Karen and Matt together, which is an interesting development. That's kind of very much the focus of episode 4.
It's certainly comics accurate, I guess. I mean, I'm glad that, they're doing that, but they don't seem to yet, the day could be coming, they don't seem to be yet tugging on the obvious love triangle threads. They don't seem to be yet doing the whole Matt and Foggy fall out over a woman bullshit.
Please don't make this into Twilight. That's the one thing I don't want to see. A pointless and exasperating love triangle based story.
I'm assuming that in their sort of this is serious stuff pretensions, they probably won't go full teenage love triangle, but yeah, I'm hoping they skew away entirely from that sort of obvious one.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, as I sort of alluded to in my intro, these are not dissimilar properties attempting not dissimilar things. This and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice.
Yeah.
This works better. I think we've pretty much agreed, considering we've spent a while being nice about this and we basically spent an eternity slagging off the first one.
This works better, I think, because this I think it does something well. It doesn't stamp "this is serious and important" on every frame of the TV show, which is what Batman vs Superman's done.
It does have some of those potentials, though. There is a lot of everything's very dark. It's all very slow shots. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of I don't know. It does clearly have this is for adults pretensions.
Is that? But I think it's not basically trying to be like, look at the art, look at the searing nature of the drama, sort of all over it. It's like, well, this is a show, this is our story, please get involved. And I think the fact that Daredevil does have and do a lot of interesting things, like the Kingpin being about gentrification, the Punisher being about how we view justice, and there's raises questions about what is justice, what is important about justice, what makes Daredevil right and the Punisher wrong. These are interested in weighty subjects we can get into, and we have got into. And it's done in an interesting way, but it's done in a subtle way, weaved into the story. It's not done in an obvious way, which just highlights how shallow it is, which is the problem with Batman vs Superman.
Yeah, I mean, that talk we talked about in episode 3, where they do just sit on a rooftop for a while and have a slightly tense chat about their approaches to vigilante justice, that could have fallen down that avenue.
It could have, but they managed to put in some tension. Like you said, there's a bit when they almost get disturbed by a janitor, and you're wondering if the Punisher is going to actually shoot this janitor.
Plus, it just feels like the conversations matter, doesn't it? Because they said the last 2 episodes, showing not telling, as they say, the difference between the two. The fact that they're now finally going to have a sort of angry shout-out about it, complete with a bit of practical demonstration, does... Yeah, it feels like it has weight. It doesn't feel like it's just stuff being said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that's what it makes it work. There's a story you're invested in. I'm invested in the character of Daredevil. I'm invested in the character of the Punisher as a fan, whereas I was just so completely turned off by Batman vs Superman, I just wanted it to end, which it didn't for quite a while because it was 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, and yet we watched a 4-hour Punisher storyline and we seemed fine with it. Again, I think it just comes down to goodwill, doesn't it? Batman v Superman lost us.
Yeah.
Me seemingly a bit later than you, but it just lost us. And whereas Daredevil, even though it does have its slow patches, has yet to lose us.
Yeah, exactly. The common thread running through these things, obviously, is Ben Affleck, because Ben Affleck was Daredevil and is now Batman. And he in that pretty bad film with is it Jennifer Garner who played Elektra?
Elektra, yeah. Well, the 2 major elements of that film were Kingpin, which they did last series, and Elektra, which they're doing this series. I guess they haven't brought in Bullseye yet, have they? Maybe they're saving him for season 3.
Yeah. Well, Punisher's getting his own Netflix show, isn't he?
That was a rumour that was then shot down. We're not going to do that way, but in a that is not currently on the slate way.
Right, that's interesting, because my one concern with this 4-episode Punisher arc is that I hope this isn't just an extended trailer for a forthcoming Punisher TV show. But if the fact that there isn't a forthcoming Punisher TV show probably means that, they will have to weave him more into the Daredevil storyline.
Well, as I say, I'll be shocked if he doesn't come back. But I think even if we do get a Punisher show in a year or 2, I think he's relevant enough to Daredevil to mean that using him in Daredevil for a while and then potentially spinning him off could still work. I think it doesn't feel like a shoehorn because he is obviously something that Daredevil can react to. And he actually, what he's doing is very relevant to what Daredevil's doing, so it doesn't feel forced. Yeah, I think so. And I think that's one of the ways that Daredevil works and Batman vs Superman doesn't, is that Daredevil, even though they've got the Punisher in it, possibly just as a means of setting up a Punisher spin-off show, the Punisher storyline works as a storyline within the broader, ongoing story of Daredevil as a character. In Batman vs Superman, the story would just stop at some points to introduce some characters for a forthcoming film and then start up again. The intro of the other DC characters was just pointless and tacked on, whereas the intro of the other Marvel characters in Daredevil is integrated into the story and works as part of the story. I do still worry that Defenders miniseries is going to be a sort of shonky clusterfuck, but as long as the individual shows stay good, I'm broadly okay with that.
Batman vs Superman and Daredevil, two things that began life as a comic. We're now moving into talking about a film that is influenced by comics, in that it's an animated film and done in a sort of comic style of animation. This is Israeli film Waltz With Bashir. Now, I recommended this to Nick last week for him to watch. Could be my favourite film. I certainly really like it as a film. So, Nick, what did you think of it?
Yep, that was pretty depressing.
Yeah, it's a depressing film.
So, pretty depressing. This is an autobiographical animation in which the writer-director chap, it slowly uncovers his memories from fighting in the war in Lebanon in the 80s on the Israeli side. And he talks to a bunch of people he knew after realising that he just can't remember part of what happened to him around the time of a major massacre in a refugee camp. And he's struggling a bit with that. He talks to a lot of people, he pieces together what happened, and then, as I say, there's a massacre. It's depressing. And it's good. I liked the sort of the slow reveal, the build up, all the historical detail you get on the way. It felt a little, this might be a bit tenuous, a little reminiscence of the true crime documentaries we talked about in episode 1, in that it's, it's trying to put a personal mystery or narrative onto this real life horrible thing that happens, but it's not inviting us to speculate about it in quite the same way, so I guess it doesn't feel quite as morally weird. No,
it's an interesting area of history that people don't know much about. I think...
Yeah, certainly I didn't know anything.
Yeah, which is why it's an interesting film for people to approach that. So a topic you don't know much about, a story told through the eyes of someone who was there. Obviously, it's about a war and a massacre in a refugee camp. It's pretty grim and disturbing. I think the end, especially, is so shocking because again, if you want to see the film, skip forward because this is a spoiler. But right at the end of the film, it goes from being this animated into documentary footage, real life documentary footage of what the massacre looked like. And obviously, you get to see the actual dead bodies from the time, and it's really shocking.
It is. It's the sort of real life horror thing which I'm well aware is available on the internet, but I usually choose not to look at. Obviously after doing a whole film in animation about this real life tragedy, I guess you maybe feel a degree of authorial responsibility to make it clear that this really happened and you're not making light of it.
Yeah.
I was watching it late at night in the dark. That unsettled the shit out of me. It's been criticised in some reviews I've read for being too on the nose. Like why couldn't you just leave it? But I guess if you're worried you're going to be accused of making this massacre into like a cartoon.
No, it's a very good point. And I think it builds up to that finale really well, how it starts, with the kind of guy who has a dream about the same war and about the fact that he killed loads of dogs in the war, and that guy's traumatized by that, and it builds up to this reveal over a long period of time, but it does build up very well. Yeah,
the visual style, and especially during some of the more outlandish surreal bits, the dream sequences and the Beirut music video bit, which was quite as close to fun as you could get in this film, I guess. Yeah, the animation style reminds me more of video games than comics, actually. It was just all these sprites moving against the static background, I think.
Yeah, I think it was done in Flash, actually. I think the only film I could think of that was all done with Flash animation.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, I'm glad that we haven't been inundated with Flash movies. That sounds like it could be a disaster. But and again, to use the quality of this to pivot back to criticising Batman v Superman, much better use dream sequences. Yeah. It's again, I am not hugely knowledgeable about the subject matter, so I'm saying that it's not inviting us to speculate and it's not morally questionable. I don't know if the accounts that presented in the film of that massacre and the Israeli army's role in maybe not doing it, but not stopping it.
Yeah, they're accused of not intervening. Obviously, there are there are alternative.
That's what I mean. I mean, I know if this is something they're accused of, I don't know if it's actually a controversial viewpoint for Ari Folman to make this film and say they did this in what is ultimately a fairly definitive way. He is, but the way he sort of builds up to this in this sort of truth quest and then goes, and now the truth. It does encourage you to see this as the historical fact. I don't know if it is the accepted historical fact or if he's actually making a controversial stand here.
I think it's difficult to establish what actually happened in a conflict that was as complex as the Lebanese civil war. And this was an element of a 15-year civil war that went on in Lebanon. And so there are obviously people who have different opinions from the one in the film. Obviously, this isn't a politics podcast, so it's, I guess, not really the time to get into the Israeli conflict or the larger sort of Middle Eastern conflict. But
it's true, and sadly we used up all our runtime talking about Batman.
Yeah, but as a film, I think what I like is that it presents the directors. This is my view on it. This is my opinion, and I think anyone who's interested in Israel and its history should watch this film as part of understanding that. I'm not saying it's a definitive take on that conflict or the history of Israel, but it does, I think, it's a very personal project from this director that makes a bold statement, I think, has to be listened to and interpreted. But I think it's certainly very beautifully animated. It's really nice to look at.
So what you're saying is that by presenting me with this film in isolation, that you, in fact, are the real monster.
I guess I am the real monster, yes. Well, I think it's worth... I think it's worth watching, sometimes seeing something out of, because if you don't have any preconceptions, if you don't know anything about the period of history that a historical film is set in, you don't come to it with any preconceptions. You're just kind of there to engage with the story and engage with the character. And although this is an area of history and a conflict I'm interested in, what I love about this film is the way it tells this story. Not so much the history of it, the way it takes you on this journey that's very powerful and very emotional, the way that it's beautifully animated, the amazing, very minimalist soundtrack. It's got sort of an 80s soundtrack to evoke the period, but the music that was written for the film is like very minimalist, very harsh, quite dark. I actually bought the soundtrack. It's one of the few films I bought the soundtrack for it, and it's a very good soundtrack.
Yeah, I think perhaps the reason it works better than some true crime documentaries why you perhaps let him get away with whatever he's asserting about history is because by focusing on himself, the real subject is arguably the man making the film, and obviously there's also a huge element of self-criticism here. I mean, again, if the account he reaches at the end is true, then yeah, I imagine he probably feels quite guilty about that. It doesn't flinch away from what he may well have done.
Yeah.
And obviously it does then unavoidably go wider to whether the Israeli army as a whole is culpable, but it's a film about unreliable memory and the narrator, ultimately, so it just about skips around maybe making any massive uncomfortable statements.
Yeah, well, it's about, his story. Yeah, this one man's story in a war, not necessarily a film about the war as a whole, though it brings in elements of the wider conflict. And I love the way they use this kind of very beautiful, dreamlike flash animation to make comments on, memory. How accurate is memory? How well do we remember the past? And, if we remember something differently, does that mean it happened differently? And so it raises a lot of interesting questions, and it explores them in a very sort of interesting way, and a very, very beautiful and moving way. Yeah,
the conversation he had early on about the nature of memory and how it's formed and stuff was entirely independent of the subject matter. Pretty fascinating.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it obviously plays into the fact that this is a film about someone trying to remember what they did, and if you can't remember what you did, and memory is fallible, then to what degree can you establish anything that's the truth? Which is the big question over the whole film. I mean, there's lots of dream sequences and surreal bits, and obviously that clearly didn't literally happen, but they happened in some way. It's also the only example I can think of a film that's an animated documentary. That's one of the reasons why I like it. It's pretty much the only one.
Yeah, it does very much, make it memorable and give it a unique voice. Yeah, I mean, it's such a personal and sensitive thing. I'm not sure I can really criticise it that much. Part of me would have liked to have seen more focus back on the Ari Folman character by the end and sort of how his memories are coming back together. But that's, I think, me trying to hammer a fictional story framework onto something that isn't, which, as we, again, discussed in episode 1, is probably not great. You have to remember what the actual point is.
Yeah, but it is, if I have a criticism of the film, it does sort of, at the end, wander away from about his own experiences and become more about the wider conflict as he kind of builds up to the reveal of what happened. It does kind of wander away from that.
Yeah, I mean, it tries to end on that, well, before the cut to reality, it does end on the picture of his face, but I would have liked a bit more cut back to him at the end, but again, I guess he doesn't want to risk, even though the film is ultimately about him, he didn't want to risk trivialising the conflict by doing the description of the really horrible stuff and then going, and now back to me.
Yeah, it works. It certainly works well.
Yeah. Yep, good film. Good film.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you liked it, and I'm always like sharing some of my favourite films with you. So, for next episode, what are you recommending to me?
Well, I considered not recommending you a comic, but then, considering what we've spent the overwhelming majority of this episode talking about them, I couldn't really resist it. So, having done a sort of sci-fi historical comic, I'm going to finally lurch into the outskirts of superhero territory this time. And since you seem to enjoy him so much on the Netflix box, I'm going to give you some Punisher comics.
Excellent.
So yeah, the comics I've settled on are written by Garth Ennis, the reasonably well-known writer of a lot of Punisher comics and Preacher and some other things, a bit of John Constantine in there.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yep, and I've got 2 books I'll lend you. They are both quite short. They're about 7 comics in total, the whole thing, one is called The Punisher Born, and the other is The Punisher from First Till Last. They are standalone stories independent of Ennis's, 100-issue run on the actual series. The first Born is set in the Vietnam War, so sort of time.
That's something I said I find interesting,
I guess. Yeah, so it's a sort of historical account of the Punisher in Vietnam War, sort of before he went back home and his family died. And this is, the comic book Punisher, so we're in Vietnam rather than the Middle East. From first till last is a collection of 3 standalone stories set at different points of the Punisher's career, again doing some background and some character development. And they're a good sort of showcase of what Garth Ennis did with the Punisher over the years.
Oh, that's good. And I'm glad that this is something I can read without sort of a wider knowledge of the Punisher comics. They stand alone.
They're very much standalone. I did consider giving you the first arc of his actual run, but I thought that might be a bit much. So these are good. It's about 7 comics, so I think that's probably readable in 2 weeks. Hopefully you'll enjoy them.
Yeah, I look forward to reading more about the Punisher. That's all we've got time for in this episode. If you're interested in more content before the next episode of the podcast comes out, why don't you head over to our website, which is moderatefantasyviolence.com. On there you can listen to all of our previous episodes and our bonus excessive fantasy violence episodes. And dig through the things me and Nick have been saying to each other over the last few months. If you enjoy this podcast and if you enjoy what you find on the website, please leave us a review on iTunes. It'll help us rise through the ranking and get the word of Moderate Fantasy Violence out to more people.
The website is really nice. Alastair spent, I think, the best part of a day on it the other week, and it's pretty cool. Check it out. Okay, and that really is it. So for more from us, there's the websites, and you can also find us on Twitter as @MFV Podcast. I'm on Twitter as @NickMB, and you can find more of my writing and blogging and talk about my self-published crime books on nickbryan.com.
You can find me on Twitter at Alastair J.R. Ball. You can also find my writing about science fiction on nimbusspace.co.uk, and you can find my writing about politics on rentradeblog.blogspot.com.
Okay, cool. And thank you very much for listening. We will see you in about 2 weeks. And the one thing I think we're definitely covering is the recent horror movie The Witch. So that'll be pretty traumatising. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, see you next time. I'm Batman.